Imagine the world roughly 70 million years ago during the late Cretaceous period. Global temperatures overall were quite warm, and the continents had yet to take the configuration we know of them today. Unbeknownst to them, the non-avian dinosaurs had approximately 4 million years left in the tank, an endless expanse of time to us, the humans, but a drop in the greater cosmic bucket. During this little slice of time, if you were walking around Alberta, Canada, between the Rocky Mountains and the Western Interior Seaway, you'd spot all the dinosaurs that now fill the halls of North American museums. But if you were to find yourself in southern Argentina, you'd experience an entirely different set of fauna that have been called exotic, bizarre, and potentially wonderful. The large carnivore of this particular area wasn't a tyrannosaur or another variant of their family, but a meat-eating bull, the Carnatorus. Carnatorus belongs to a group of theropod dinosaurs that often escape mainstream notice in American and European media, a family called the Abelisauridae. These carnivores are known from South America, Africa, and India, which at the time were all joined together, along with Antarctica and Australia, into a supercontinent called Gondwana, itself being the remains of the original supercontinent Pangaea. Gondwana was, for the most part, separated from North America, Europe, and the Asian landmass called Eurasia, and so the animal there were quite often distinct from the northern hemispheric species. The abelisaurs were unknown to science until their discovery in South America in the mid-1980s, when the family name was coined in the description of the first known species, Abelisaur conmawensis. These dinosaurs had arisen in the mid-Jurassic from the horned ceratosaurs and were an apex predator in a world that had previously been dominated by the gigantic charosaurid theropods like Giganotosaurus, Mupasaurus, and Tyrotitan throughout the Cretaceous. While this group of giant carnivores eventually went extinct in South America, and with the northern tyrannosaur never making it that far south, the abelisaurs took it in their own fashion. In general, abelisaurs were built fairly typically for theropods, with long, low bodies that were held parallel to the ground. However, their faces, in particular, were rather short and deep, with a somewhat upturned jaw and a shallow, slim lower jaw. This made these dinosaurs sort of look like pug-faced in comparison to other theropods. Their teeth were generally short and stout, and their limbs were small. Really small. The long joke about tyrannosaurs having short, useless arms doesn't take into consideration the front lids of abelisaurids. But the arms of tyrannosaurs were indeed reduced and not used for much, they could at least perform some type of function. Not with these, whose arms were truly vestigial. The humerus, or upper arm bone, was generally the longest part of the bone of the arm, with the rest of the limb being so shrunken it was barely there at all. They had individual finger bones, but these may have not even ended in claws or may not have been separated from the outside at all. Some have even suggested that, like some flightless birds today, the front lids of abelisaurs were so small they may not have been visible outside of the body wall in life. These were truly useless arms. Onto Carnatorus itself. This beast was described in the early days of research by José Bonaparte, the recently passed godfather of Argentinian paleontology, who has paved the way for much of this science in South America. The holotype specimen of this dinosaur was remarkably complete, with only the lower legs and most of the tail missing. In a family full of weird dinosaurs, Carnatorus was extra weird, as many of the characteristic adaptations taken to the extreme in this species. The head of the Carnatorus was even more squat and blunt than any of its known relatives. Its neck vertebrae were robust, with an upward projecting process that would have anchored thick, powerful leg muscles. The tail vertebra bore sideways, pointing projections called transverse processes, something present in all tailed vertebrae. However, in Carnatorus, these bony projections not only grew outwards, but also upwards in a sickle-shaped design that curved forward towards the animal's front. This may seem baffling to those who know biology. We'll get to that later. Perhaps the weirdest and most noticeable feature on Carnatorus was the pair of horns growing over the dinosaur's eyes. While other theropods such as Allosaurus, Ceratosaurus, and various other tyrannosaurs had cranial horns as well, these were generally small, pointed upwards, and were formed out of laceral bones just in front of the eyes. In Carnatorus, however, these horns were formed by the frontal bones in the middle of the skull and pointed outwards as well as up. They are also noticeably larger than the horns of any other theropod compared to the size of the skull. These ridges of textures on the horns indicate they may have been covered in a sheath of keratin in life, which likely made these external horns much longer than the bony core suggests. These horns were the source of the animal's name, in fact, which, when translated, is meat-eating bull. So, what was a carnivorous dinosaur like using these horns for anyways? Well, it has been suggested in the past that they may have been used to help bring down prey. This idea is treated as more than just skepticism at this point, since no other living animal, extinct or living, has been known to actually hunt using horns, particularly cranial horns. More readily accepted theory is the horns were used for combat between two individual Carnotaurs, perhaps for breeding rights or territory disputes. In what exact manner Carnatorus uses horn for, however, has been debated hotly by paleontologists over time. Early ideas proposed they were used in a similar manner to modern bovids like sheep and cows, and the Carnotors violently rammed each other with their pointed horns. Scientists advocating for this theory pointed out that Carnotaurus has an extremely strong set of neck muscles that may have been useful for delivering fast, powerful blows. Other authors have suggested that, instead of violent ramming, the Carnotaurus may have slowly yet forcefully shoved past each other with their heads, using their horns to help distribute the force of these shoves. Maybe it did both. We don't know. Whatever its method, the Carnotaurus does seem well suited for head-to-head combat. Perhaps the bluntness and depth of the head help with this sort of thing. It also should be noted that the bone along the top of the dinosaur's snout was of a similar texture to the horn cores, indicating that it was probably covered with keratin as well, perhaps forming some kind of horn pad or boss, like a shield. Perhaps this could have been used to further aid the animal for combat purposes. The Carnotaurus is more than just horns, however. The jaws of this dinosaur weren't just short. The lower jaw was also quite shallow, unlike the bulky mandibles of many other theropods. This, combined with the relatively long hind limbs of the Carnotaurus, have led some research to suggest that this species had a fairly weak, fast bite, and therefore specialized in hunting in smaller, faster prey animals. Carnatorus itself was also likely quite fast. University of Alberta paleontologists studied the strange shapes of the Carnotaurus tail vertebra and realized that the upward-facing traverse process would have likely made a lot of room for carpal femoris muscle. This muscle ran along the lower sides of the tail of dinosaurs and pulled the femur backwards when it contracted, providing much of the walking power. With this room at the base of the tail, the muscles of Carnosaurus was greatly enlarged. This made the tail extremely round and thick, especially near the base, provided a substantial amount of power for moving the legs. This would have resulted in the Carnotaurus being very fast, but not very agile. While more room at the back side of the tail for the leg reactor muscles, this meant less space in the muscles on top of the tail, which provided stability and movement. Carnotaurus sort of got around this with the interlocking tail vertebra, which stiffened the tail a bit, but, as Peterson and Clare argued, the two scientists who discovered this, it would not have been much to make tight turns easily with such a rigid tail. Does this imply Carnotaurus wasn't as suited for chasing smaller, nimble prey as we thought? Perhaps. Some paleontologists have argued that the bite strength of this dinosaur is not as weak as previously suggested, and that it was well adapted to delivering strong, slashing bites to large prey. Maybe its hunting strategy was a fast, headlong dash to large herbivores, followed by a nasty slicing bite to cripple their prey? We will never know for sure until other evidence is brought forward in fossil data. But like many other living animals, I suggest that perhaps the Carnatorus may have had its preferred food sources, that it ate whatever it wanted to, or rather, whatever it could catch and kill. Carnatorus also has the distinction of being one of the few large theropods that we have extensive skin impressions found for this particular theropod. While fairly common in large herbivores, skin impressions of theropods are rare, but the holotype specimen of Carnatorus came with quite a bit from various parts of its body. The skin of the dinosaur was scaly, rare bit of positive evidence for non-feathered theropods. Most of the scales on Carnatorus are small, as is typically for other holotypes, but there were also irregular rows of large, bump-like scales moving down the back and tail, possibly used for protection during combat. We do not know what color Carnatorus is, and we will probably never know, as usually the way of finding that requires feathers. While it's nice to see that despite not being a mainstream dinosaur, Carnatorus has been seen in popular media. Notable examples include the Disney movie Dinosaur, where it is much too large, may I say, and more recently in Jurassic World: The Fallen Kingdom, where it gets taken down by Tyrannosaurus, though in the books it could camouflage and turn invisible. It is still good to see a dinosaur from such an unprecedented place and time. Who knows what more information we'll be able to find.